All right, let's get started. So my name is Randy Barnard. I'm with the State Water Boards. I'm in charge of the Recycle Water Unit, and I'll be help facilitating today with our panel of experts up here. So just as a reminder again, it's going to be webcast and videoed. So when you have a question, I'll be coming around with a microphone. You got to make sure you speak into the microphone or the people on the internet are not going to be able to hear what your question is, okay? A little bit of housekeeping stuff. If there is an emergency, you just go out this exit, down the stairs, out the front of the building, and then go across the street to the Cesar Chavez Park. Look for somebody holding a State Water Board sign. Just congregate with them, and then when everything's clear, we can come back in the building that way, okay? Bathrooms are right out this door, to your left, right around the corner. Let me see, and with that, we talked about the microphone. The presentations, please sign in, make sure you sign in, and there are copies of the slide deck in the back for you, so you can have that. The presentation will be listed on our website. It'll be available upon request at our DDW Reg Unit Water Board email address. Let me see, comments will be reviewed after the workshop, so if we can't answer the question really easily, we will take it, we'll look at it, and we can answer it after for you. And with that, and then please hold all your questions until after each segment of the presentation. So we won't interrupt the presentation, we'll get to the end because they'll probably answer your question during the presentation. But at the end of each segment, we'll come around and do question and answers for that, okay? Does anybody have any questions to start out with? All right, sounds good.
Thank you, Randy. My name is Mark Bartson. I head up the technical operations section of the State Water Board here. One of the main parts of my job is the development of regulations and standards. I also oversee the Recycled Water Unit, which Randy is actually the head of the actual work, but Randy is part of my staff. I appreciate you all being here today. I want to say a little bit more about the workshop and the work we've done to date to get to this point. I'll talk about the path ahead to get this policy handbook fully developed and adopted by the board. So Randy went over the ground rules for today. I wanted to mention who the other speakers are today. We broke our presentation into 3 portions. I'll be doing the introduction and the schedule, talking about that. Then as Randy mentioned, at the end of my presentation, you can ask me questions. We can pass the microphone around. Then I'll introduce our next speaker, who is Andres Weininger, who will guide us through really focusing on the core elements of the existing regulations, the 6 core elements, the modifications we envision for those, the things that we are, it's not quite a proposal, but it's very close to a proposal, that these are the ideas that we've developed over the past 33 years of these, more than that, of these regulations. So there's that. He'll walk through kind of a crosswalk to see those look like. And finally, Andres Aguirre at the far side will talk about some of the changes and ideas we have for the certification. We know that's a very important topic for obvious reasons. We recognize the value of the certification programs and the programs they've developed, and we will want to talk about some of the things we have in mind there. So we know there's an interest in that. Oh, the one thing the 3 presenters have in common here, we all at one time worked in the San Bernardino office. Andres currently works there. Jonathan previously worked there, and I worked there a long, long time ago. So anybody listening from San Bernardino, love those mountains after a snow. I hope we get some more snow. Shout out to San Bernardino. So our agenda for today, after introductions, we will go through our staff presentations again. There's 3 segments. I'll start it off in just a minute. Then we'll shift to feedback on the 5 issues we identified in our workshop announcement. We'll go through those and take comments on those. We're trying to structure the information we gather not only on the changes to the regulation, but how there will be improvements and how they will address the key elements of the program that need some updating. Then we'll take a 5-minute break or so, and then we'll go into a question and answer session. I believe we'll have time for all the questions you might have. The overall goal of the workshop is to provide background information, our current thinking, and most importantly, solicit feedback from stakeholders, water systems, the experts, anyone who's interested in this program. We realize this program touches a lot of people, all the public water systems in California it applies to, all the folks involved with delivering safe water. A little bit of an introduction. The first regulations, it turns out, in California for cross-connection control were adopted just a little over 100 years ago. Andres did the research on this. He found copies of the write-up and so on, and they were amended in 1924. The current regulations were adopted in 1987. They lack detail in many areas and should be strengthened in our opinion. One of the things we did in about 2005 is we drafted a set of regulations of ideas for updates, and we got feedback from industry. Those regulations were not actually updated at the time, but we saved all the thoughts then, and over the last 20 years or so, we've been writing down and gathering thoughts on things that we think and industry has suggested. We've done more of that recently, and we want to do more of that today. Obviously, having a strong cross-connection control program protects public health. The water has to get from the treatment plant where it's safe to the customer and still be safe. One of the things we wanted to mention too, with the current public safety power shutoffs, it kind of creates a new vulnerability for a lot of systems to depressurization and backflow. Again, a kind of reminder, the information today is preliminary, not quite a proposal, but it is getting close to that. So the structure of our presentation here, first I'll give a recap of the statutory requirements, fairly brief. I'll talk about the process and time schedule to get the draft policy handbook posted for public comment, 2 public hearings, eventually a presentation to our board, and the opportunities to comment along the way. Andres will mention go over briefly the current regulations, the core elements, and then kind of do a crosswalk of the changes and revisions we have in mind for those elements. Andres, again, will talk about potential revisions to the certification requirements and a little bit of a discussion on transition, what the transition period might look like to the new regulations. So let's talk a little bit about a recap of the statutory requirements. Under the Safe Drinking Water Act, any person who owns a public water system has 5 main requirements. There's a lot more than this, but there's 5 that it starts off with. And really, number 2 and 3, to ensure that the system will not be subject to backflow under normal operating conditions, is key to the backflow, the basis for the cross-connection control requirements. And also, of course, providing reliable and adequate supply of water, not only into the system, but to all the customers. So it's foundational to the Safe Drinking Water Act. So number 2 and 3 there are the ones that are the basis in the Safe Drinking Water Act. Assembly Bill 1671 from 2017 required the State Water Board to adopt standards for backflow protection and cross-connection control by January 1st of this year. Obviously, we didn't meet that schedule. Obviously, we've done a lot of work, and from here, we have a fairly aggressive schedule to get this work done. It is a priority for us. So they fortunately provided for the adoption of a policy handbook rather than adoption of full regulations through the Administrative Procedure Act, which is a much more cumbersome process and also very difficult to amend. So one of the beauties of the policy handbook is it is relatively simple to modify down the road. We want to get it right as much as possible, but if there's things that need to be revised later, we can deal with that. It also mandated that we develop a policy handbook in consultation with state and local agencies and persons with expertise, all of you. Hold at least 2 public hearings before adopting the policy handbook. Once the policy handbook is adopted, the previous cross-connection regulations become inoperative after 90 days unless we decide to keep some elements of those. So what the Safe Drinking Water Act says now specifically is a public water system shall implement a cross-connection control program that complies with applicable regulations and with standards adopted by the board pursuant to this section, the policy handbook, once it's adopted. So I want to talk a little bit about the process and time schedule for development. So the process in general, we are of course going to give consideration to stakeholder feedback. We have learned a lot from industry. A lot of the things we've incorporated came from industry itself. We've done some of that. We've gotten some of that feedback already. We want to get more today and as a follow-up to this meeting. There'll be the 2 public hearings to get feedback on the actual proposal. There'll be consideration of the comments, revisions to the draft policy handbook, and presentation to the board for adoption. I'll get to the schedule in a minute. The structure of the handbook we anticipate will be 3 chapters and a fair number of 5 or 6 appendices with a lot more detail than what is in the current regulation. So we've considered stakeholder feedback. We're working on the draft right now. We have a team together, and we're working to pull all that together. So basically, the overall schedule going forward for the development of the policy handbook is the 2 public hearings we're anticipating for June 2020, and an adoption hearing planned for August or September by the state board. Again, the policy handbook becomes effective upon adoption, and the existing Title 17 regulations become inoperative 90 days later. So some of the factors we're going to consider are really an analysis of the benefits of the proposed changes to requirements. Why are we proposing the changes we're proposing? That will be part of our write-up. The consideration of impacts on different types and sizes of systems. We know the impacts are different, the cost is different, the management of a program is different across water system sizes and types. The transition to the new requirements. How much time is needed? Is there any phasing by system type and size? And then identification of implementation issues, both in advance, and there will always be issues that we identify along the way. But we'd like to get your thoughts on implementation issues that you foresee so we can plan for those. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan in just a moment, but the format of the workshop here was we would like to open an opportunity here for you to ask questions of kind of my initial presentation. Are there any questions on what we've covered so far? We will have a chance after the 3 presenters to go back to that. So if you have a question, Randy can pass around the microphone. You can identify yourself, and we'll see if we can answer it. Any questions at this point?
We're also going to let the people on the webcast know that if they have questions, just to email those in or text them in, because we won't be answering the webcast people live. We'll follow up with you after.
Oh yeah, question.
Tom Enslow, here today on behalf of the California State Pipe Trades Council. So I wanted to make one comment on your introduction about Title 17 and these regulations being out of date since about 1987, I think you said. And one thing I'd like to point out is that cross connection and backflow requirements are also in the California Building Standards Code, because of course we have backflow and cross connection controls in buildings themselves. And the Title 24 requirements are up to date. They're required by law to be updated every 3 years. And part of the problem is that while those have been continued to be updated, Title 17 hasn't. So one thing we're looking forward to is to have the Title 24, the new regulations be consistent with Title 24, particularly because a lot of the people who are doing the cross connection, where you have the connection to the public systems, are the same people doing it in the building. And so they need to have similar standards.
Okay, thanks for that comment. Gentleman over here.
Mike McDonald, are these questions and comments going to be captured for subsequent
Yes.
Review? Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you, Jennifer West with Water Reuse California. I'll have other comments down the line, but I wanted to echo the last person's comment in that we are interested also in making sure that the changes captured here with these regulation changes specifically to the Swivel L changes that we're going to be discussing. We also need to have Title 22, the non-potable regulations for recycled water be updated to have those come into play. So we view this as step 1, but if we don't get the Title 22 updated, we are going to not be able, my understanding talking to staff is we're not going to be able to see the benefits of the Swivel L. So that also needs to be updated.
Anything else? Great, so our next presenter is Jonathan Weidinger. He's a staff engineer in our Monterey District office. And as I mentioned, he worked previously in our San Bernardino office, been with our program about 10 years. Over the last few months, I think 3 or 4 months now, he's been part of our team in building the handbook and working through all the feedback and issues, and he'll be working with us, with our team going forward. So Jonathan, if you could walk us through the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone. As Mark said, my name is Jonathan Weininger. I'm a staff engineer in the Monterey District Office. It's great to see so many people here this morning. Hi, everyone that's watching on the webcast. For those of you in the back, there's also some room here in the front if you don't have a place to sit. So we were having a discussion yesterday about probably the most important thing that we're all here for is whether or not there's a hyphen between cross and connection. I don't know if anybody has clarified that, but I think we're going to settle with a hyphen. So Title 17. Title 17 was published in 1987. It only includes about 6 pages of regulation. So my talk this morning, I'll be going over the elements that exist in Title 17 and what we're proposing for the new cross-connection control policy handbook. So we'll be comparing what exists now versus what we're proposing. And again, as Mark said, if you have any questions about the presentation, please hold those until the end. So we look at Title 17 as including 6 elements in its current form. So what we're proposing those 6 elements to basically be expanded out to 10 elements. So I'll go through each one of those 10 elements, comparing what we have and what we're proposing. So the first element is the public water system's legal authority to implement a cross-connection control program. Currently, every public water system is expected to have some sort of a legal instrument, typically in the form of a ordinance or maybe a set of operating rules that gives the public water system that power to implement the program and ensure that all the customers are complying with what your cross-connection control program is requiring. There won't really be any significant changes to the concept of a legal instrument or a legal authority, but what we're asking is that if your existing ordinance includes a reference to Title 17, you'll have to go back and amend that to remove that reference and put the reference to the cross-connection control policy handbook. One of the biggest changes that's not specifically spelled out in Title 17 at the moment is that there is no language that says you have to have corrective actions to ensure that you can achieve your desired goal of making a customer test their assembly or install an assembly. So the policy handbook will include there must be some corrective actions to get that done. That could be in the form of denial or discontinuation of water service, or possibly having your ordinance say, we'll go out and install that assembly, test it, and bill the customer for that. So some sort of way to get your program implemented, the things that you need to do to get done. Element 2, hazard assessments. So in Title 17, there is a significant section on hazard assessments. The element itself is written in rule as the conducting of surveys to identify water user premises where cross connections are likely to occur. We're not looking at drastically overhauling that, but what's not written in Title 17 is criteria for reassessment. So that will be something that we're proposing, that you can't just go out, assess the place once and forget about it, but there needs to be some kind of schedule for reassessment. Some ideas that we have for reassessment criteria could be change of ownership or occupancy, duration since the last assessment. You know, if you have reason to believe that there is a cross connection there, or if a backflow incident has occurred, or even at the State Water Board request. And another thing that's not written in Title 17 is protecting your own facilities. So water systems are expected to not have any cross connections within their own system. So their sources, their tanks, pumping stations, treatment plants. You must do hazard assessments of your own facilities. So that should be ongoing, because you don't want to actually create a cross connection at your treatment plant or something, for example. So that's going to be something that we're proposing to put in the policy handbook. Element 3, backflow protection. Title 17 says right now, the provisions of backflow protection by the water user at the user's connection or within the user's premises or both. So we're not proposing to overhaul that, but some ideas we have for revision including, this is feedback that we're asking for today, is what could be some potential alternatives to an air gap. We're also looking at clarifying the installation criteria. Those of you who are well versed in Title 17, which I'm assuming everyone here is, you know that the double check installation needs to be updated. So that's something we'll look at. We're also looking at updating the hazard criteria and appropriate type of backflow protection table. That is one of the feedback questions at the end of the presentation. And as I believe Randy mentioned, or someone else mentioned, there is going to be installation and operation criteria for swivel Ls. And that's required for those very rare recycled water use sites that have a swivel L installation. So if you are one of those sites that has a swivel L, as written in AB 1180, the cross-connection control policy handbook will include some protocol for what that changeover will look like, what the installation will look like, what the testing frequency and inspection of the RP will look like. So that must all be included in a cross-connection control plan if you are one of those utilities that have a swivel L installation. All right, element 4. So Title 17 says now that your cross-connection control program must have the provision of at least one person trained in cross-connection control to carry out the program. We've kind of interpreted that as a cross-connection control coordinator over the years. You've probably heard that terminology used. We're not proposing to drastically overhaul that either. There still should be at least one person who oversees the program. Really, the only difference that we're proposing is that in the cross-connection control plan, which is the plan that public water systems will use to verify compliance with all these elements, you must include the contact information for that person and keep that updated. So it's a working, living document. If there's a change in the cross-connection control coordinator, then you need to go and update your plan to address that change. Element 5, backflow preventer testing. Title 17 says, the establishment of a procedure or system for testing backflow preventers. You still have to have a procedure for that. Maybe the biggest difference here is that your plan should also include a schedule on how you can get 100% of the backflow preventers in the system tested every year. Element 6, records. So right now, Title 17 says the maintenance of records of locations, tests, and repairs of backflow preventers. So basically, you need to have a record-keeping program. What we're proposing, and this is something that is probably done already by most utilities, is to actually have a database where you have a list of every single installation, including who owns it, serial number, type of backflow preventer, year installed, whatever information you have on that, but just to have something in a database where all that information is accessible. You should also include the testing records in your database and include hazard assessments or summaries of hazard assessments. And there should also be a defined procedure for record keeping. Everything is all about just proving that what was done was actually done. We always stress during sanitary surveys is to have a robust record keeping procedure. That could be hard copy, digital, all of the above, but just to have a mechanism to make sure that all of your records are stored. So element 7 is certified backflow prevention assembly testers. This isn't actually an element in Title 17, but it's included elsewhere in Title 17. It says backflow preventers shall be tested by persons who have demonstrated their competency in testing of these devices to the water supplier or health agency. So some potential revisions we're looking at is requiring all backflow preventers to be tested by certified backflow testers. And Andres will talk in detail about the certification overview of what we're looking at in the next presentation. Can you please? I can get back to you on that. I have it in front of me. I'll get back to you that during the break. That's okay. So Andres will be talking about that in great detail during his presentation. But another part of the cross-connection control plan will be to have a procedure that ensures that as a public water system, you're verifying that all backflow testers are certified. That could be a procedure for verifying their test kits, having reports, test reports set up so that you can spot if a preventer is actually being tested. So maybe precautions for detecting any sort of fraudulent testing. So that's going to be something to incorporate into your plan, is just how, as a cross-connection control program, are you ensuring that those tests are valid, that you're getting a valid result? Okay, so something new. Proposed new element number 8, and this is backflow incident response, reporting, and notification. Again, I know everyone here is very dedicated to cross-connection control, and I think I heard some people mumbling about the 2005 draft rules. Does anybody remember those? They were posted on our website for a really long time. But in that draft 2005 cross-connection control regulation package, there is a section about backflow incident response and reporting. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but we're basically proposing to just incorporate that. So it doesn't exist in Title 17. It was in that 2005 draft document. And what we're looking at is there must be a plan in place to have an incident response to a backflow incident. So that, and we're not saying exactly what you have to do, but it's going to have to include something like contact information, sampling procedure, notification, follow-up procedure, even just collecting a sample and storing it so that you can tell exactly what it is after the event has gone away. So there must be some backflow incident plan. And there will also be requirements for customer notification. What we're looking at in terms of reporting a backflow incident to the State Water Board, this is something that we're asking for some input on, but right now we're looking at the time frame that's established in that 2005 draft, which is report the incident to the State Board within 24 hours. But that's something up for discussion. I mean, everything here is up for discussion. Another proposed new element, number 9. This shouldn't be a shocking one, but you should have a customer outreach program and a public education program. Everyone here is dedicated to protecting public health, and I know that this is a very passionate topic for a lot of people because it's an unseen world of contamination and hazards. So it's good to have a program where you're educating the public about why a cross-connection control program is so important. So there should be an implementation of some kind of public outreach and customer education program. And we're looking at some potential ways of implementing that program. Would be public outreach events, new user agreements, postings on your websites, mailers, bill inserts, and even information in your consumer confidence report. And this is not something that's in Title 17 right now. So this is the last proposed new element. This is new element, element number 10. And that's coordination with local entities. So that's having the cross-connection control program of a public water system coordinate with local plumbing and building officials, maybe school maintenance officials, just whoever deals with any sort of plumbing to make sure that there's a coordinated effort, that whenever there's a new construction, you can catch if you need to install or require the customer to install some backflow protection. It's just having a good coordination with your local agencies. And I'm sure that most already do this, but this will just be written as a proposed element. So the next part of the presentation will be Andres talking about the proposed differences in the backflow tester and specialist requirements. And I believe that's the end of my presentation. So we want to open it up to any clarifying questions about any of those elements. If you ask a question, can you please reference the slide number so we can go back to that slide and talk about it?
Slide number. Sure. My name is David Gans. I work as the Chief Building Official for the City of Oceanside in California. We're in San Diego County. A couple of things in particular with, I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to reference the slide, but when there was a section there regarding the importance of protecting the user's water basically at the meter and within the property. And it gives an option for, the public health department to, or water department to do one or the other. San Diego County has a unique situation in that they dropped their cross-connection control program some years ago. Are people aware of that up here? So the internal devices that are mandated to be tested annually by our plumbing code are not in a program where they're being tested. I'd like to see some mandatory language placed in that the health department must assure that a program is in place to deal with internal devices. So that would be my comment. And then also in reference to the table for the backflow prevention devices, that a table exists in the California Plumbing Code. That's a very robust table. It's updated every 3 years. It's put together by industry professionals throughout the plumbing industry. I'd like to see that that table is either included in this document or referenced in that document. I think that would be a benefit.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. It's Glenn Reynolds with Cal Nevada AWWA. One of the concerns that I have on the hazard assessment is that the intimation or premise of what this is that this will be based on cross-connection surveys. And I'm a cross-connection control specialist, done it for 15 years. And the survey is only good for 15 minutes, and then it expires. Once the door closes behind me, it's no longer relevant. And I get it, we'll always have surveys, and it's a way of addressing this issue. But I think when you, so that's slide 19, several slides earlier, so conducting hazard assessments. So this says, okay, once a year I want you to go through and see if it's going to kill anybody. So that says, okay, for 364 days out of the year, you can kill all the people you want, but you better have it good on that once a year survey. And I think it's an approach I'm uncomfortable with. I think that if you go back to your earlier reference, and I'll give you a slide number here, but you asked that, and I agree with this, that we're going to establish an enforceable policy ordinance that says, thou shalt protect the drinking water with a backflow program. And if you have a policy that says, so I'll give you the one we use at Coastside County Water District. It's really simple. It's one paragraph. It says every connection to the public water system will have backflow. Single-family residents may be exempt, period. And it means we don't have to go and assess everybody. We have to drive by and make sure they got a backflow. And if it's a single family, it's likely exempt, but not guaranteed. Obviously, if they have sewer ejector or dual water systems, it's got to have backflow. And I'm not suggesting that you make that the law, but the wording of this says, oh yeah, you're going to do an inspection and then we're all clean and legal and nobody will die. And I think that if we started on different premise and said, hey, you will have a policy that there won't be a cross connection, here are a couple ways you can do it. You can have your ordinance say that everybody has a backflow unless they're exempt. This ties into your public relations campaign. And I did the cross-connection implementation for the city of Palo Alto. And they followed your idea. They may have done it before it was your idea, but they had put out a press release. And people went nuts because they felt that the inspection survey was going to single them out and penalize them with a $15,000 backflow that then the business next door was not going to be hit with. And it went terribly badly. We changed the policy. And as a direct result from that. So I think that those three things kind of merge together to an approach that will make this easier and smoother to implement, easier to enforce, and easier to administer for the regulators and the cross-connection folks.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Michelle Bilodeau with Yolo County Environmental Health, and I just kind of to dovetail on what the gentleman from Oceanside had said is that on slide 29, I want to underscore the importance of also coordinating with local environmental health, because we're out there at these facilities and oftentimes being the local primacy agency for small water systems. So I think it's really important to also include us in the conversation because we're there. And then also I just wanted to go back to slide 23 about the coordinator and what exactly do you mean by training? Do you mean that the person is certified as a specialist, or can they just have some training? So I would just like to see a clarification with that.
Well, Andres will actually talk about that in great detail.
Okay, great.
Rich Mills, DWR, retired. One thing that should be noted is, and Tom Enslow referred to this, is that we have the California building standards, in particular the California Plumbing Code. The Department of Water Resources is responsible for the portion of the plumbing code relating specifically to the use of recycled water on site. And I think that the drafting of the handbook needs to be written recognizing what's in the California Plumbing Code and maybe also working with DWR and the Building Standards Commission with respect to incorporating requirements in the plumbing code that address the on-site changes and the reporting requirements that can be built into the plumbing code to help augment the concern that was just expressed by AWWA about what happens in the other 364 days. Having maintenance logs or whatever by the customers themselves, and certainly reporting requirements whenever any plumbing changes are made on site are made to the appropriate authorities is part of that ongoing surveillance. And I think there just needs to be coordination and recognition of that in the development of the policy handbook and also in working with DWR, the Building Standards Commission, and the Department of Housing and Community Development on this.
Thank you. And I think if this is going to be opened up to comments, we'd prefer to save those to the end. That way the people that are listening to the webinar, because I don't think they can hear you all that well. So if we'll just hold for questions about my presentation and then save the actual comments until the end, if that's okay with everyone. We can stay on our agenda here.
John Graham with California Water Service. Regarding slide 23, the coordinator must be familiar with and responsible for overseeing the program. Will there be any certification requirements, or are we sticking with the old, well, I was trained by a guy who was trained by a guy who knew somebody who was certified?
So yeah, I think that's something that Andres will talk about a little bit, but that's something that we're still taking feedback on.
Okay. Slide 27, the customer notification. Would these be tier 1 notifications? How are you going to dictate, the timing of those notifications?
Still to be developed.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll have to figure out some kind of criteria for how the incident will trigger what kind of notification.
And finally, slide 30, bullet point 2, hazard assessments to be performed or directed by the specialist. Is it perceived that a specialist would remotely oversee someone else making judgments on cross connections?
Andres will also talk about that.
All right.
I think that slide is actually out of place.
I could say one thing about that. Our intention with that, or our thought, is that the specialist may not do all the preliminary gathering of information, but would be very much involved in the sign-off.
So I'm fairly concerned about the 24-hour reporting turnaround for a cross-connection discovery. Could you describe exactly how you would imagine an investigation to a potential backflow event going, and at what point the reporting you would deem like this is the point where discoveries happen and you should report?
Talking about,
Sorry, Adam Pfeffer from San Jose Water.
yeah, reporting to the Division of Drinking Water.
And/or
that's-
public customer notification. It's good.
Yeah, so that specific slide there, we're proposing that the water system reports to the State Water Board within 24 hours of discovery.
Well, and you say customer notification in the bubble right above
the
that,
backflow incident, after 24 hours of discovery of the backflow incident.
Right. So I'm trying to, from my incidental knowledge of backflow incidents is maybe somebody reports a smell in the water, and then somebody else reports a smell in the water, and then you dispatch a crew out there, and they say, oh, yeah, there's a smell in the water. Is there anything going on at the treatment plant? And you go up to the treatment plant, or you could go to the wells, or maybe take a sample and go to the lab. You might get, 72-hour turnaround on your lab results. At what point are you expecting us to say, this looks like a discovery? So the discovery, and then you have the clock. When your investigation process and the uncertainty alleviation is way more than 24 hours in 99% of cases, a 24-hour window is not workable. I not because it's so short, but because the process for resolving uncertainty is so long. And I can guarantee you that once you get to the end of the discovery process, in retrospect, everybody's going to look back at you and say, you should have notified here, or you should have notified here. All of the hindsight quarterbacking will think that you should have, caused alarm to the customers and the state board by notifying as soon as you had any doubt about whether there could be a problem versus doing some due diligence. So that sorry, that was kind of a comment, but I do. Yeah. My question really is, how do you envision this happening, like from step one step to the next?
So answer is we're looking at feedback on that time frame. So if you have maybe a proposal on that, let us know.
Anything else? Okay.
Mike McDonald, FlowSafe Consulting. Slide, I'll try to be brief, slide 19. The term cross-connection is not a foul language term. Cross-connections are generally absolutely necessary in industry, in the internal plumbing of this building. The key thing is, are they appropriately controlled? And you can use the HACCP concept to speak about that. Slide 2.3, training, recommend training be defined, as another gentleman mentioned. Slide 2.4, testing should, we're speaking of a time frame of a calendar year basis or a 12-month basis, some type of time basis for that. Slide 2.6 defines certified. Slide 2.7, oh, excuse me, I don't have a comment on that. Slide 2.9, the plumbing official, I just like to mention that one of the issues that I've seen in the past is that the plumbing official, for example, that signed off on this building for occupancy, signed off on it at that time, and I would state that, or I would think that the plumbing official will probably never, ever be back in this building unless some imminent thing happens or someone pulls a permit. And then the plumbing official will only look what's on that permit. Other than that, the plumbing official will never be back in this building, in my opinion. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ready? So again, one more question. Oh, here, Randy.
Hi, it's Ken Payne, Cal Neva, AWWA. Slide 24 talks about having a schedule for ensuring each backflow prevention assembly is inspected, tested, and repaired. And will there be any penalties or repercussions to the public water system if they do not comply with this? I mean, we can go out and shut the customer's water off, but that's kind of like the nuclear option, and it's very difficult to push that through. You know, if there are some type of penalties for the water system, then it gives us a little bit more leverage to compel the customer to get those assemblies tested. So my question is, will there be any penalties or repercussions to the public water system for not complying with this?
You want to take that one, Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I would say we haven't really thought about that. It's a good point. I could see where the penalties could provide some teeth. I think what you maybe are saying too is if you have a schedule established and it's not met, is there going to be, are you also asking whether there would be an action against you potentially? So that, okay. Oh, microphone. Okay. So he was asking if it would be part of the annual report perhaps. So we'll make a note of that. Why don't we come back to that question at the end after our, I think it's a good question. And also the one about the incident response. I'd really like to come back to that one when we get to our final question and answer because there's a good discussion on that. So go ahead, Randy.
My name is Luis Huerta with the City of Sacramento Cross Connection Program. I believe that the revisions to the policy handbook should, allow the water system purveyor to determine how they're going to apply it to their specific circumstances. I don't think we can come up with a one-size-fits-all right here policy, for each kind of these issues. So that was basically my comment.
Thank you.
Stephen Garner with California, Nevada, AWWA, and I'd like to build on Ken Payne's comment. In past discussions, the idea of denial of service on slide 18, corrective actions include denial or discontinuation of water service. The struggles have been, as were mentioned, that cutting off water is against, I think, was it 685 or something, the human right to water. So how we square that and how some ordinances already exist where they can't even do that when people don't pay bills, or when the backflow test or installation or repair does get conducted and the customer doesn't pay the person that did that, that's a really sticky, messy area where the customer, the service provider, and the public water supplier are without some leverage, similar to what was discussed about being able to be stating that I'm going to get dinged if you don't do it. But how that gets done is a complex scenario. So,
yeah, that's something that we're taking into consideration. I think it's AB or SB 998 about the water shutoffs. So yeah, that's definitely something taken into consideration.
Adam Pfeffer from San Jose Water again. I'm curious about on slide 19 for the surveys. This could, I know they're just potential revisions, but I don't have any sense of what the workload is going to be looking at this slide. I mean, are we talking about a defined time window for a survey of every service in the distribution system, or are we talking about, only surveys of systems that are commercial or industrial or landscape or fire, or are we talking about surveys of for like high-risk services or just everything? Because that's the difference. I just a quick math. I had heard all services bandied around on like a 5-year window. We would need like a 20 FTE increase to even get close to doing that. So that's I'm curious what the intent was of how the surveys will be pushed into the handbook.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those details haven't been 100% figured out, but I think the main intention is just having some procedure for reassessment, which isn't in there now. So for those, maybe a industrial site that doesn't have any backflow protection, I mean, is it being reassessed? So I think right now the way that we're proposing is for the public water system to create what they're proposing on reassessments. But we haven't really put what, if there is a duration or not. I mean, a lot of that's up for discussion.
Okay, well, I think that it makes a lot more sense for a water system to be charged with like internally doing records assessments to see what % of commercial or industrial or services don't align with their backflow records and to physically go and survey those sites versus a blanket survey requirement for all or even a significant portion of the services in a distribution system.
Yeah, thank you.
John Graham with California Water Service. Just want to put a fine point on it. When you're talking surveys, are you talking all service connections? I'm not talking about the recurring, but the initial. Are we talking all service connections, or are we going to focus solely on the non-residential connections? What's the desire of the Water Board?
Well, really, the initial assessment, if you've already done those initial assessments, then it's not like you have to redo an initial assessment. It's really looking at those places that have never done an assessment as the initial assessment, and that would include every residence. I mean, to me, that's my understanding of what we're proposing here. Again, we can hold these until the end where we can have a real feedback. I mean, this is, right now, just let's hold it to questions about this presentation. Andres still has to get to his section.
Any other questions?
This is Ken Payne with AWWA again. On slide 26, certified backflow prevention assembly tester, you said the public water system should have protocols in place to detect falsified reports. So if we do find that a tester is falsifying a test report, and let's say they're certified by AWWA, and we send that report to you, are you going to pull that certification? And what if they're also have a certification with Northern Cal Backflow Prevention Association? You know, will there be a statewide registry for testers so that if we do prove that they did something like this, they would be barred from testing in the state of California for a specific period of time, or, you know, fines or penalties?
I mean, the first step would be that if you detect that, then you prohibit that person or that company from testing. In terms of actually the bigger picture of certifying agencies, since the state doesn't oversee those programs, that's a little bit more complicated.
So I guess my major concern is that, let's say someone, they falsify a test report, let's say in East Bay MUD's jurisdiction. I would not want that tester testing in my jurisdiction. So that's the reason why I'm asking that question. It's like, if you got a DUI in Contra Costa County, oh, okay, we're gonna let you drive in San Francisco. No, you're gonna be banned from driving, period, in California. So that's why I'm asking.
No, it's a great point. And that's something that I think we're also taking feedback on. So.
Any other questions on slides? Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you, everyone. So the next presenter will be Andres Aguirre, who is an engineer in the San Bernardino office.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Can you hear me? Let me just go. So I'll be talking to you today this morning about potential revisions to the certification requirements. John went over the elements that we're proposing to change. Well, I'll go over some of the role responsibilities in the handbook, what the certification requirements will look like. So for public water systems, these are the roles we come across for the cross-connection control program. We call it the coordinator, but in Title 17, it's the person trained to carry out the cross-connection control program. That will not change. There should be someone, all water systems should have someone overseeing their program. What we've seen also sometimes is that this person is the specialist. Here, we're introducing certification requirements and duties for the cross-connection control specialist. So the specialist will have certain duties that he will need to do, and there will be a staffing requirement for having a specialist for some systems, depending on size or hazard assessments. It could be both. We've seen a specialist could be the coordinator, but it's not specified in the handbook that one has to be a specialist. And as John previously mentioned, there will be a certification requirement for backflow assembly testers. So what are the staffing requirements for the specialist? We're looking at having larger public water systems, possibly 3,000 connections or more, be required to have a specialist on staff or through contract. For systems smaller than 3,000, they may be required based on hazard assessments. They have a high number of high hazard connections. Customized are some non-community systems, such as airports, that they would have someone look at their system. The specialist must provide timely consultation, and for emergencies, usually that the public water system can contact their specialist to help investigate, answer questions within 1 hour. As John mentioned on the hazard assessment sections, we're looking at the hazard assessments being done by specialists. One of the duties for the specialist is to determine the degree of hazard. This is not new. Specialists certified by industry have identified high and low degree of hazards. Where this is new for the handbook is Title 17 does not have high and low hazards. We define them in the handbook, or propose to define them in the handbook, and the specialist will identify the degree of hazard for the connections. We're also looking at possibly including, the current Title 17 includes a table of high hazards and minimum protection required. We're looking at adding to the handbook examples of high hazard connections to assist the specialist, and could be added as the handbook is updated and information is understood. As far as the specialist, having a certified specialist, the question that comes up, well, what is a certified specialist? The handbook proposes to establish minimum criteria for certification programs of specialists. These include testing of knowledge and principles, hands-on testing, and standards of strength of examination. Certifying agencies would need to demonstrate they meet these minimum criteria established in the handbook for public water systems. One of the options we're looking at is having the potential to using ANSI as a third-party independent party to accredit that the certifying agencies meet these requirements for public water systems. The public water systems, their responsibilities will be for their assemblies within their service area, they would need to use certified backflow assembly testers. And cross-connections control specialists that do activities in the handbook identify hazards for the public water system would need to have valid certification. So with that, I'll transition into new requirements, how the public water system will achieve compliance with this. What we're looking at is having a cross-connection control plan. Each public water system will need to develop a plan that outlines how they will meet the proposed elements. Items such as swivel L or assembly testers, notification, assessment procedures. This will be outlined by the public water system in the plan they develop for the state board to review. We understand some components of this may take time, such as updating ordinances. Many ordinances we see reference, we're going to follow Title 17. So that will need to change and be updated, and implementation of that may take time. We're also considering a phased-in approach, similar on some public water system water quality people are here. such as LT2 or Stage 2, where it was phased in based on water system size. We understand there's updating everyone at the same time may take time, so having a phased-in approach is something we're looking into, and consideration given for smaller water systems. And with that, earlier, Randy, we'd like to, unless you have questions on my section.
So thank you, Andre, for catching us up. We're almost back on schedule. We're supposed to go into the next section like 3 minutes ago. So what we're going to do is in the next couple sections, there's going to be comment time and feedback time. So your comments and stuff can be recorded then. But for right now, if you have any questions on content of the slide, any clarifications of his slides, we'll take that right now real quick.
Thank you kindly. Morning, Keith Pierce, Inyo County Department of Public Works. Just wanted to comment that the plumbing code allows for licensed plumbing contractors to go ahead and install, test, and rebuild backflow preventers. And they're licensed, but they might not be certified, but by law, they're allowed to test, rebuild backflow devices. So there's a conflict there that'll have to get worked out. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And again, so any comments on slides only?
Gabriel Gomez, Liberty Utilities. Question about the 6 months to get the plan completed. Will you or DDW supply some sort of template? Because you're going to probably get agencies that will be coming up with their own plan, and it'll all be different depending on the agency.
Yeah, we anticipate that we'll probably develop guidance documents as the handbook is implemented and phased in.
Mike McDonald, FlowSafe Consulting, slide 3-4, hazard. I personally do not buy into the notion of high hazard or low hazard. I don't think the plumbing code speaks in those terms. For example, the lowly hose bib. A hose bib vacuum breaker in the plumbing code is defined as hazard protection. So I just wanted to mention that. Over.
Marty Johnson with the El Dorado Irrigation District. I don't know if this is going to be talked about later in the presentation, but my question has to do with the proposed, or if there is a proposed requirement for a certified backflow prevention assembly repairer. Is that being talked about? Is there? It's not specific to a slide. It has to do with certification. I was under the impression that there was going to be a proposal for a required certification for repairing a backflow.
We talk about that in the final question and answer.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
I'll make a note of it. Thanks.
Adam Pfeffer from San Jose Water. The presentation, it seems to indicate that the state is not evaluating or pursuing a role as a certifying agency for backflow testers. Is that true, or is that still an option, or is that out? It seems like if you're exploring looking at ANSI to certify certification agencies, that would
I would say that's
you wouldn't be going that way if you were thinking about doing it yourself.
We're still considering all our options there, to be honest. Yeah, we haven't made a decision on what our final role will be on the certification.
Another question over here.
Victoria Kunda, California American Water. You kind of described how you will be identifying the requirements for specialists and for testers, but you also mentioned a person that will be a coordinator, and you mentioning that this person needs to be familiar with the program. Will you have a specific requirements how you can determine if this person is familiar with the program?
We haven't, at this point, we don't intend to try to define that, but it's something we could consider. In what we've written up so far, we haven't tried to tackle that. We could talk about it a little bit more at the end, though. I think it's a good question.
On slide 38, the mention of a cross-connection control plan, is that something that's submitted to the state and publicly available?
To be determined how we'll manage that.
Okay.
This is a follow-up question to that question, which is that in the past, a licensed or certified cross-connection specialist has done a survey evaluated by the Southern California standards, and then the district engineer has played with it. And how the different district engineers play with it differs obviously between different district engineers. So it seems like there's got to be a parallel track of bringing on board state staff on what their understanding of cross-connection control, the threat, and how it's handled is. And I think that that's a really important part of this process that hasn't been mentioned to this at this up till now. And I would argue that they need to be certified to the same or better standard than the subjects are certified and held to, because otherwise I've got a beautician telling me about my skin cancer.
Ken Payne, CalNEVA, AWWA. On slide 32, cross-connection control roles, you talk about the specialist and the backflow assembly tester. My question is, under what role who would inspect air gaps to make sure that they're compliant?
That's under consideration. If the assembly tester or the specialist could also do the assessment or the inspection. Sorry.
All right, sounds good. Oh, well, okay, one more, and then we'll go on to the next section.
Sorry about that. Luis Huerta with the City of Sacramento. Would be a possibility to, in the same slide, to add basically an endorsement for the specialist that deals with alternate water sources. Right now, when you go to the specialist training, there's not training regarding, alternate water sources, rain capturing system, gray water systems, or any other alternate use, and how it's used within the premises.
Okay, this is the last one, and then we'll move on to the next section.
I just wanted to correct the comment that was made that in the plumbing code, any contractor can do the testing of a backflow assembly, and that's actually not correct. The section 603.2 of the plumbing code requires that testing or maintenance be performed by a certified backflow assembly tester or repairer in accordance with the ASSE Series 5000 or otherwise approved by the authority having jurisdiction. So again, this is where the plumbing code's been up to date. It does have these certification requirements that we're talking about adopting. That is already in the buildings.
Thanks for that reference. All right.
Okay. I guess from here we can go to the stakeholder feedback, and I'll pass it to.
So I guess we could take a poll here. Do you guys want to do the break now? Yeah. Yes? Okay. So we'll do the break now, and then when we come back, we'll do the feedback and question and answer period. All right. So let's take. Let me see. The break is Like 10 minutes? Let's do 10 minutes. So we'll meet back here at 10:25. All right, everybody, if we can take our seats, we're going to get started again. Okay, so here's how we're going to run the last hour of this, because we only have this room until 11:30, and then they're going to kick us out because another meeting is going to start. So I'm going to have to be a stickler with the microphone this time. What we're going to do now is we're going to go through feedback items and then question and answers at the end. So Mark's going to come up and he's going to show you what the feedback items are. We'll get about 10 minutes on each feedback item. So I think there's 5 of them. And then at the end of that, we'll open it up for whatever time we have left to do question and answer. So when we're going through this, if there's a comment that you absolutely have to get out in this forum, go ahead and do that. And then once 10 minutes are up, I'll just have to pull the mics. But if you can submit those comments to us in writing, that's just as valuable, because we're going to look at all that stuff too, and it helps us out. So all the comments are valuable. If it's something you have to say now, you can go ahead and do that. All right, so with that, we'll start the feedback section.
So thank you, Randy. Just to clarify, so we have these 5 topics that we put out there for people to comment sort of in those categories. One question though, Randy, if we use 10 minutes for each one, that will use up almost all the time. So if we can, the plan then really, if any comment you give on these topics that you give us in writing is just as valuable as if you say it here. But we will go through these. If you want to say it here, that's fine. Otherwise, we'll have more time available for question and answer. So if we use less than 10 minutes, we'll have more time for Q&A. Yes, real quick. So there's a question on what our deadline is for submittal on any comments, and I would say end of next week probably would be helpful. There's no official deadline, so we'll take it, but try to get to us by the end of next week. So with that, feedback item 1, so I think we've touched on some of this already, but aspects of the current cross-connection control regulations that should be strengthened and revised to improve protection of public health.
Thanks. I feel strongly that this should be based on, we're doing a society change in doing this and their implementation, et cetera. And I think we want to be careful that we are case-based or results-based. So when you had the comment that you were considering a timeline to submit a report, is that based on a case where somebody never reported it and that was a problem? Or more to my worry, when we say, hey, we want you to respond within X minutes of having a backflow reported, has there actually been a case where somebody blew it off? And so when we look at our current cross control, and I must acknowledge that I deviate between what our policy through Cal Nevada and the certification program and the Red Book is, that to me is the policy that I'm operating on. I feel we have good public health strength, but what I worry about is making sure that we don't gold plate our cross connection control program. In other words, if we go to a really beautiful standard that's very academic, and we have too much cost and labor and survey effort to implement that, we may actually be missing the junkyard with the cross connection because we've made a really high program that's harder to implement. And you can quote me, just me, but I would be happy if we got an 80% compliance of everybody having backflow than I would that we had a really perfect program, but we weren't able to enforce it or manage it to 80% of our clients. And I feel like that's what we've got now, is we've got a great program, but it's not rolled out uniformly across the state. So if you ask me about how to improve public health, I would almost say maybe the standard has to be less stringent, but better applied. Controversial.
Noted.
That's a great comment. That's what we're looking for is not really questions that we can answer back, but comments that would address these situations for us so that as we're developing the regs or the handbook, it'll help us think about those issues. So that's what we're looking for. Anybody else?
Dave Gans, City of Oceanside, Chief Building Official. In order to protect the public health, I think the health department needs to be mandated to make sure that there's a program that deals with devices that are on premises. There's a little bit of a gap there that allows them to not do that at this point, and I'd like to see it closed up.
Anybody else?
Victoria Kondo, California American Water. I'm not sure if the question is for this section, but I actually don't know where to ask this. We recently had a lot of conversations with the fire department on how to address fire services. Do they need backflow device or they don't need? You probably heard about passive purge fire protection systems. But my concern with this is nobody knows who have to approve, like, okay, you do have a passive purge system, so you don't need a backflow device. And in this case, I'm very happy that the gentleman in this second row brought the kind of, my opinion, we have to tell everybody need to have backflow devices. Some people can be exempt. So it's much easier to determine if you need or you do not need a device.
Anybody else?
Mike McDonald, Flow Safe Consulting. I've spoken many times with Mike McKibben, and I just wanted to get it on the record today regarding NTNC water systems, which I deal a lot with. They are ill-defined, in my opinion, in current Title 17, and I think it's being rewritten in to reflect that there needs to be more information regarding them, especially because you have to. The basic rub is that the NTNC water system and its source, the water well, is all contained on a piece of private property. And so what you end up having to do is you have to inspect all of the plumbing on the premises. Every plumbing connection has to be observed and determined if there's a problem or not. So I just wanted to state that for the record so that it does get implemented in there. Thank you.
Let's pay special attention to the non-transient, non-communities in the policy handbook, perhaps this type of system.
All right, so 3 suggestions. One of them is for gray water. With all the push towards conservation in the state, there's a lot of agencies that are incentivizing and lobbying for gray water without the use of backflow, because nobody wants to spend $10,000 on a backflow when they're spending $3,000 on a gray water system or whatever. So I think it's very important. I think a current reading of Title 17, you'd be hard pressed to not define most gray water or rainwater catchment systems as an auxiliary water source. Yet you have regional boards giving guidance that they should be exempted from backflow in certain circumstances. So I think it's really important that the updated backflow guidance specifically includes what storage volumes or pumping capacities or what features of a gray water or rainwater catchment system would require a backflow. Second thing is reflecting back to what Ken said, that we need to have a way to expel testers that are acting unethically across the state. It can't just be localized. And so I think that the updated handbook needs to provide some kind of means for that to happen. And I forgot my third.
All right, well, with that, we're going to have to move on to the next question. But if you have more comments, submit those, or at the end when we do the question and answer, you can talk about it at that time.
So the next one, aspects of the current cross-connection control regulations that would provide public water systems with additional guidance, direction, and/or authority to implement their program.
Luis Huerta with the City of Sacramento. We submitted our comments, but I have something that I think it will be beneficial for everybody. So we talk about Title 17, Title 24, right? We have different regulations out there. As a water purveyor, what is the supremacy ordinance when we deal with cross connection?
All right, thanks. Any other comments?
Marianne Wakeman, ASSE International. I just want to bring up a couple of things that I think that we would all agree upon, and that should be put into the state handbook and regulated across the board. And that's at the frequency at which a backflow assembly should be tested, and it should be tested upon installation, upon repair, if it's relocated, and at least annually. And I think that minimally that should go into it. The major certification bodies that work within the state of California have come together and come up with a set of guidelines that are all agreed upon, and it would be great if we could have the state put that into their manual handbook that says on a statewide basis, these are the minimum things that need to be done. And I think that would be an important thing. That goes also for those people that are doing that testing out there, that they should all meet certain minimum requirements. And that would include a 40-hour training class, a closed book exam, training on certain things, including, and they've been listed out, and that certification is good for a period of 3 years. So I think that there's some things that have already been done that could be implemented into the handbook that would be helpful. And in fact, it could be too that problem that's occurring with testers that have falsified reports, that could really only be done on a statewide basis. If you created some sort of a database that the certification agencies could feed into that said, this is someone who has shown that they've been a problem for it. But we do need some of this to be done, not just at the each individual water district's level. Some things need to be stated within the handbook that need to be regulated from a statewide level.
Thanks, Marianne.
John Graham, California Water Service. First, I want to echo Marianne's comments. We need specificity in our requirements. I made these comments to the Water Board a few years ago. I think they bear repeating. Water utilities understand what they need to do to protect public health. That's our main stock and trade, is protecting the health and safety of our customers. The gap between that and what's in regulation is always going to be viewed as overreach by our customers or other regulatory groups. In our case, since we're a PUC regulated utility, if it's not in Title 17 and we're attempting to implement it, we're going above and beyond. So I encourage, when you're developing this book, that you put in there, as Mary Ann said, the minimums. This is what you need to do. Everything else is gold plated. If you want to do it and you're able to pass that through your governing body, great. But these are the minimum standards to protect public health. If you do all these things, now cross-connection control and backflow prevention is a key element in your multi-barrier approach to public health protection.
Thank you, Ken.
Adam Pfeffer from San Jose Water. Hearing the current state of things at the workshop, it does seem like there is a trend or push towards roping more residential connections into backflow programs, and I'm not opposed to that. I'm not speaking against that. Just logistically, the way that many systems in the state have kind of orchestrated their programs is to focus on industrial, commercial, big users, and to only turn to residences if there's a history of backflow or some pumping or some special risk factor. And if the proposed handbook is going to incorporate language that's going to include equal evaluation of commercial, industrial versus residential based on hazard, and actually getting into homes to view the hazard factors in homes, I just want everybody, the state, to be aware that that's not unreasonable if you're just looking at it from a hazard standpoint, but from a logistical standpoint, that's going to take an army of public health officials, public campaign, public relations, informations, lots more staff. So just to be aware of what the implications are if we're looking at that if extending the same hazard evaluations to residences as commercial and industrial. So.
Cindy Garcia, Georgetown Divide Public Utilities District. I'd like to follow up this gentleman's comment to, again, reiterate the fact that this is going to be, it's going to be helpful, but it's also going to be burdensome to those of us who have small water systems where we're very large area, but very small staff, not a lot of water customers. We have a lot of agriculture, a lot of irrigation, irrigable lands. We have very small gated communities in and around the area, so our population is very small. The demographics financially are very low. So I'm glad to be here, but to think about the regulations as they're coming down forth and the implications it's going to mean for our small water district are not only going to be staff burdensome, difficult to tackle with our topography and our domain, as well as burdensome financially to the customers, and we've already proven that to be so with some of the irrigation customers that have been told, put this device in now before we turn on your irrigation in May, without a lot of background because we only have an ordinance, we don't have a program. So we're in a state of chaos trying to address this issue. We're trying to get a handle on it. We're excited about being here to be part of the workshops and the development of the handbook, but please keep in mind that you have some rural communities out there that are financially strapped and that are staff strapped and are governed by a board. So there's a lot of dynamics, a lot of complex issues for even small water systems as opposed to large systems.
Okay.
Anyone else?
All right. So if you think of more comments on that, please submit those.
Next topic, feedback on Table 1 and Section 7604 of Title 17, establishing the minimum type of backflow protection required under various scenarios. A lot of detail here. Any comments?
John Graham, California Water Service. I do have suggestions for updating the table, and I believe they mirror largely what Cal Nevada AWWA Backflow Programs Committee developed. However, if I had my choice, we wouldn't have Table 1. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've been beat over the head so many times by customers because their specific application is not in Table 1. So leave me alone. You're picking on me. Again, back to the overreach. So if you are going to include something like Table 1, there needs to be a very descriptive introduction that this is only a partial list, that there are numerous other cross connections that could create an equal or greater risk to the water system.
That's a great comment. That's something we were thinking about.
And some of that, I would agree with what he just said. I have a real hard time with the double check. It's so you look at your bottom item, residents using recycled water. So if the recycled water is not potable, why is it okay to protect it with an aesthetic only backflow device? I don't see it. And the price point between a double check and an RP when I'm done with the installation is so minimal, it's really hard to me to see where the double check is a valuable player in this. And I think it exactly adds what was just said, that now the customers are trying, well, I can save $20 if I only put in a double check. So my vote for this table, and I agree with him, table's a bad idea, but get rid of the double check.
Mike McDonald, the end of 7604 situation is not covered in Table 1, shall be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, and the appropriate backflow protection shall be determined by the water supplier or health agency. This carries over into the NC water systems also, because it's not in Title 17 per se. I think it's included in the draft. I think Mr. McKibben has included that, but this is the kind of a little open door that I use in conducting audits to specify stuff, but it's based on the plumbing code. It's not based on looking at through the eyes of Title 17. It's based on the plumbing code, which includes a lot of non-testable type devices. So that is, in my opinion, the blinders have to come off of Title 17 in a way to reflect that, because it is a public water system, and the board is regulating them, and yet it's not. They're being given a short shrift, I think, in Title 17 at present.
Any other comments, questions?
Dave Gann, City of Oceanside. The plumbing code has a much more robust table than this. Actually, I think there's probably 3 pages worth of direction that's given on appropriate protection devices. The plumbing code's updated every 3 years through a consensus-based process. It's going to be able to recognize new technologies and new methods every 3 years, and I'd like to see this table either replaced or otherwise reference the plumbing code.
Ken Payne, Cal Neva, AWWA. One thing I'd like to see added to this table is this be temporary connections to potable fire hydrants, primarily like for construction or like there's a street fair going on. Usually they'll get a meter from the purveyor of water, but that meter will only have like a non-spring-loaded swing check in there. And a lot of times these guys, these are high-rise buildings that are going up, and you don't know how they're using that water. So I think there needs to be a minimum standard for connecting to a potable fire hydrant.
Mary Ann Wakeman, ASSC International. One thing I want to point out is just the reference to standards. And in fact, instead of having this table, what we could reference is the standards that the different backflow assemblies are created to. And that's what the plumbing code does, but it also, I think that it could also be done here. There are more standards than just, there are more assemblies than just what's listed there. And we could list out, and then would be left to the individual specialist to determine what the correct application is, as opposed to making it so prescriptive under this table. And we did, I know that we have provided a list, but we would be glad to, again, provide a list of standards, both ASSE and CSA and AWWA standards that talk about what the different correct applications are for different situations. And that would be perhaps a little easier for the purveyors to handle, is to have those standards available. And in each case, those are ANSI accredited standards that I think is an important part of it, that's already gone through that process of being reviewed and audited and through an open consensus process. And that's a reasonable way, I think, of handling this.
All right, we'll do the last comment and then we'll move on.
Victoria Kunda, California American Water. I propose to also add in to the hazard residential premises that have all house treatment units. We just recently had the cases where we identified a potential cross-contamination issue with the installed unit. So I think in all house treatment units might be included in this list as well.
And again, if you have a comment that we didn't get to, please email that to us.
Feedback item 4, options for regulatory oversight accreditation of organizations that provide certification of testers and specialists.
Stephen Garner, California, Nevada, AWWA. I heard a couple of comments about the opportunity to share the news about disciplinary actions taken against testers that falsify records or otherwise act in an unfavorable way. Currently, as an organization that certifies, I encounter some legal complications if I announce any of that publicly. I am required by Title 17 to list publicly all of those that are certified, but not those that have been removed from certification. And given the regional and statewide implications that were discussed earlier today, if the state should decide to call upon certifying bodies to so declare those who've been removed for cause, that might give us some legal protections and also communicate effectively across the state for those bad actors.
Marty Johnson, EID, or El Dorado Irrigation District. It seems to me that if we want to, one option would be for this issue with dealing with fraudulent testers. Years ago, the state took over treatment and distribution licenses. The state could consider having the program and having a state license. That way, if it was revoked from the state, you're done, just like your driver's license.
Dave Gann, City of Oceanside. On a previous slide regarding this, you mentioned ANSI accreditation. I'd be a very strong advocate for having an ANSI accreditation process, for this.
Marianne Wakeman, ASSE International. I would like to just suggest that you add one more thing into this. We're talking about regulatory oversight or accreditation of organizations for certifications of the testers and the specialists, but I would like you to also consider the same regulatory oversight for organizations that list or approve backflow assemblies and devices, okay? Because that's another important part that can be done, and it brings another whole element to what are those assemblies that are being installed and who have they been listed and approved by.
John Graham, California Water Service. Echo the comments from my colleague EID. If the state is really serious about keeping tabs on this, they're going to need to pull this in as a certification they manage. You have an enforcement branch already in place. Other states have done this, and in my comments previously submitted, I always point to the state of Washington, who has figured out how to manage this thing called backflow quite well, quite effectively. And I say that from firsthand experience because one of my service areas. And they issue the certification, manage the certification. It's akin to their treatment and distribution system. And I think it's time the state step up and take this on.
Thanks, John.
Tom Henslow on behalf of the State Pipe Trades Council. I'd just like to, reiterate that we really do need a statewide consistency on these certifications. I mean, right now, under the, current regulations, every single jurisdiction and every single water agency has the individual requirement to determine which certifications are applicable, which do they accept. And in reality, there's only 3 statewide certifications that are used in California, and really, throughout the country, and they're all pretty much identical. The problem was when a small water agency approves one certification, they're not going to put the resources into looking at the other certifications. This has created a real restraint of trade. And if we want to talk about costs, having a certified tester or cross-connection control specialist be able to work in Elk Grove, but not in Davis or not in Sacramento, that's a real restraint on trade and increases costs for everyone. And we need to make sure that it's standardized across the state. People are talking about a state license. I don't think that the state wants to get into the certification business. It's already there. However, they could have a state license that is based on you having a certification by one of the approved certification agencies, and then they keep that database. Something like that could work, but you don't need to reinvent the wheel with that. We have these agencies out there. They do a great job. They're all essentially the same in what they do. Let's just make sure that it's consistent across the board. And if you're certified by one agency, you can work in any jurisdiction as long as it's a state-approved certification.
Luis Huerta with the City of Sacramento. I believe it will be of help for the organizations that provide training that they have a state Water Resources Control Board expected range of knowledge of the testers and specialists, similar to treatment and distribution.
Any other questions, comments? Okay.
Item number 5, options to address the provisions of Assembly Bill 1180 related to the swivel L or changeover device to supply potable water to a dual plumb system during an interruption in recycled water service. Current regulations require an air gap.
So this follows my comment earlier that by making it easier for everybody to comply, I think allowing an air gap or a reduced pressure principal backflow device gives us protection, adequate protection, but if you stick to requiring an air gap, they've got to put in a pump. If they have to put in a pump, they have to put in power. Not that PG&E won't get that done in the next 2 years, but it becomes a really burdensome addition, whereas putting in a reduced pressure principal backflow device, it meets the bill for me.
Anybody else?
Thank you. Jennifer West with Water Reuse California. We're obviously very supportive of this provision as we were the sponsors of AB 1180, which actually passed in 2019. And as I said before, we will need to see Title 22 updated because there is a provision there in the dual plumb section of Title 22 that specifically requires an air gap for the 2 assemblies. So that my understanding is we must have that updated in order to see the benefits of this. And a couple more comments. We will need to, we're definitely going to, this applies to possibly new swivel L assemblies and protection there. And then there are some, as the previous presenter indicated, there are agencies that have swivel L devices now in place. We'll need some process to make sure that those are protective and that are grandfathered in as we move forward, for lack of a better term. So the existing, and then we'd like to see this for new, because we really do think this can help incentivize the use of recycled water in dual plumb buildings.
From the perspective of a water purveyor, if we have meter protection with an RP, I don't think constitutes a particular risk. But from the perspective, I'm coming from a background of meter protection, right? So if for an internal protection system, what Glenn said about the survey is only is as good as the day of your survey, I think that this introduces a significant amount of risk to the inhabitants of that building for what plumbing additions or things might happen with the supply in between whatever RP or protection you have in your source and your L, and there's risk associated with that. And if there's any backflow, that's recycled water that's going to be going into people's plumbing in that building. From a purveyor sense, a meter protection is probably going to be fine for the system. But for the building, speaking from somebody who doesn't have public health responsibility for premise plumbing, I would be concerned about that for the people in our service area that have those kind of setups.
Luis Huerta with the City of Sacramento. Just want to basically convey that the requirements for and the evaluation of the permission to the premise to use a swivel L connection should be given to the potable water purveyor. So the potable water purveyor will, on case-by-case basis, analyze the degree of hazard and establish the procedures for the implementation of the swivel L.
Okay, so if you have any other comments on that, please submit those. And with that, we'll have, it looks like about 25 minutes for the question and answer period.
If I could, I'd like to revisit the conversation we had about the incident response within 24 hours of a known backflow incident, the discussion, and I think what we were getting to is, when do you know? There's an investigation has a span. You may not actually know for sure ever. So I think we'll really be looking for suggestions on ways to approach that. And I think you were the one who, yeah.
So I know that there's been push starting with the WIN Act to try and get all health-based response in 24 hours, and I appreciate that. For for bacteriological events, you know, we've worked through this as water utilities, and I know personally I managed a contract with our lab. We had to write special provisions so that no matter when the results are read, that we get we have an on-call number that we pay a service so that it routes it to somebody who's paid to be able to answer the phone at any time of day, such that when we have a specific trigger from a defined event at a known time, we can in turn get that notification and respond within 24 hours. So there's a considerable amount of care and effort that goes into our lab contract and the process by which they respond, such that a live human being gets notification and can turn around and act within 24 hours. All the uncertainty and doubt around what constitutes a backflow event and when you actually know about it, I just can't even imagine a process that could get public notification to the state and customers within 24 hours. When it's hard enough when you have a lab, like when a technician looks at 6 p.m. and he looks at the bottle and reads it and then knows that's the instant where the chain starts. It's hard enough to get 24 hours in that response. And I think it's appropriate to do so, don't get me wrong. But I just mean that when you have a really, really defined sequence of events, it's certainly possible, but it takes special considerations. And if you don't have that defined sequence of events, it's not feasible.
I'd like to share a backflow incident that happened in the Bay Area. A woman called at 7 a.m. and said that her kitchen curtains blew up in flames, and we're required to log water complaints to the water department. We logged it and we rolled out. The woman's kitchen curtains were smoked and gone. There was smoke on the ceiling. She was hysterical. She claimed she turned on the faucet and put the kettle on, and her kitchen curtains blew up. It took us a week of 3 or 4 of us working that case. And the water utility was really good. They looked at whether somebody had horizontally bored through a gas line, whether a gas line was run through a sewer line, and then Roto-Rooter had cut through it. The following weekend, water utility guy saw the neighbor's garage door was open and figured out that he was using what's the chemical? I just lost it. No, carbide with water to make acetylene gas for his oxygen acetylene cutting torch, and he'd forgotten to turn off his garden hose water supply into his carbide tank. The gas had pushed back as a burp. We couldn't reproduce it. We couldn't find it. It took a week of following that. So when did the incident occur? It occurred the following Monday, but we didn't know what had happened until Saturday at noon the following week. And so I don't see how you can say to the district engineer, nail that water utility because they didn't report it within 24 hours. We didn't know we had a backflow incident. We knew we had a problem. We had a customer complaint. We had an emergency. But we didn't know what it was until a full 7 days of investigative work. So I'm really, and that's an actual, it happened in California. So I'm really uncomfortable about, hey, you violated the law by not reporting that.
Thanks, go ahead.
Michelle Bilodeau, Yolo County Environmental Health. So to piggyback on that, what Glenn was just saying is it underscores the importance of maybe not so much having a timeline per se, but having better guidelines to follow from the state about how to handle a backflow incident, because so many places don't, utilities, health departments, et cetera, don't really, just kind of made up as we go, you know, and so perhaps that's more important or significant than necessarily coming up with this 24-hour turnaround time, is more guidance from the state about how to handle these situations.
Victoria Kundo. I think we might, the Area Resource Board's approach can be used for these specific cases. For excuse me. So in Area Resource Board regulations, they have a provision when there is a breakthrough condition that happens with diesel generators. They specify that 24 hours notification from the moment a responsible official determined breakthrough condition. So maybe we can use the same, like from the moment when the responsible official determines, yes, this was a backflow incident caused by this, this, and that, then from that moment, we can have some timeline to report. Because I agree sometimes, and for Area Resource Board regulations, it's the same. Like some, in my experience, we had probably 18 hours until we finally were able to determine there was a breakthrough condition. And from that moment, when it's officially determined, yes, it's happened, we have 24 hours or like hour to report.
Keith Pierce, Inyo County. A question. Are you considering a blanket requirement that some sort of backflow device be installed on all services, residential, industrial, commercial? It's a question. Thank you.
No, that's not part of our, that we haven't considered that.
Marty Johnson, El Dorado Irrigation District. Going back to my question earlier, I thought I saw somewhere in, early on in this process that there was going to be a requirement for a separate certification to repair a backflow. Is that not? Am I not? It's in the plumbing code. So are we required to have this certification, or will we be required to have a certification in the future?
To do a repair. Well, that's not in our, it's not in our current standards. I don't know that we're adding that yet. We haven't discussed adding that yet, but we've got the comment.
We'll take that comment. We're going to check to make sure because, yeah, it's come up a few times, so we'll make sure. Thanks.
Basically, I wanted to clarify. I think what we were talking before, it was slide 27 about the reporting. And I basically agree with the lady on the left that said that it says here, it is proposed that within 24 hours of the discovery of a backflow incident. So that means not the time that the backflow incident was reported, the time that you actually find out, which could be a month later or 3 weeks after all the investigation were conducted. So I think that's where we're going.
Yeah, those are good comments. We'll look at the wording of that because this is all just still proposed wording.
Because people are, this is Adam Pfeffer from San Jose Water. Just throwing out another case. Well, we had a persistent bacterial positive from one of our TCR sampling stations, and after repeated attempts, we couldn't get it cleared, and so we sent cross-connection inspectors to survey the neighborhood around the area. At the same time, we did intensive scour flushing, and we did some disinfection of all of our sample stations. So we took those 3 mitigation efforts. It was discovered that one person who was a residential customer had a teed landscape connection in between his meter and his backflow, and we disconnected that tee and took samples, and they came back clean. So was that a backflow event? Did we ever find out? Was it confirmed? And that's the majority of the types of cases that we're aware of. Is there's no point in that where we actually did confirm that it was a backflow event. So that would be exempt from notification, or at some point would there be an implied, well, that was the closest thing you got to a cause, so you should have notified about that. Or
Perfect. So we got it. So the 24-hour and the definition of when it starts, those are things we're going to look at.
Mike McDonald, Flow Safe Consulting. Regarding the curtain comment, all hail the hose bib vacuum breaker. I'd like to comment regarding public outreach. And this is absolutely self-serving on my part, but I'd like to see a listing that indicates that specialists such as me or testers are available to serve the public. I'm a service provider. I used to operate a program as a civil servant, but now I'm independent. So I'd like to see that listed either by the state or organizations such as AWWA, and so people could choose and get bids based on people in their area, mainly like in their zip code or surrounding zip codes, something like that that serves the public. Regarding repair, one way of tackling this, I think, would be to have the manufacturers conduct workshops. It wouldn't be a super duper certification, but it could be a way that says that this particular person attended this workshop, we went through this repair procedure, blah, 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 and they were exposed to all this and they understand it. So that might be a way of dealing with it, because the manufacturers, of course, know their devices inside and out, and there are a lot of old devices out there that are now obsolete, but they still test. They test properly, so they're in use. So just wanted to throw that out.
Any other questions? Here we go.
All right, I'm not giving this up yet. Marty Johnson, El Dorado Irrigation District. And y'all can tell me to be quiet if I'm not making sense. So I'm looking at AB 1671, section 116810. Reads, to ensure that testing and maintenance of backflow prevention assemblies are performed by persons qualified to do testing and maintenance.
Perfect. All right, thanks for that reference. We will check. Make sure. Thanks.
Dave Gans, City of Oceanside, Chief Building Official. I have a copy of the plumbing code section. I have about 20 of them I brought that in regards with the testing and repairing of devices. I'll read it. It was read once before. Just says testing or maintenance shall be performed by a certified backflow assembly tester or repairer in accordance with ASSE Series 5000 or otherwise approved by the authority having jurisdiction. So it does talk about, it does reference repairs as you need to be certified in the plumbing code adopted by the state.
Perfect. Well, this is what we have this for, is now we found a hot issue we got to address. So any other questions, comments? Yes.
As a water supplier, I think it's important that our customers hire people who are knowledgeable to repair the backflow preventers. My understanding of the repair certifications that are available focus on a few assemblies and safety topics. It's inconceivable that any certification would cover every make and model of backflow preventer. So I think we need to be careful in what it is we're specifying. What's our goal? Do we want qualified people doing the repairs, or do we want to create another bureaucracy that we've got to manage?
Close with my comments. So Luis Huerta with the City of Sacramento. We find that the backflow prevention assembly tester course any organization gives out is a 40-hour course. And there is no time to deal with all this, but the principles are established already there, that you use the appropriate repair parts and the appropriate repair parts and the appropriate procedure established by the USC 10th edition manual. So I think if the policy handbook establishes these principles there, that you use the repair parts. If you remove a shut-off valve or if you remove a test cock from the backflow assembly is no longer approved, I think these things should be put into the policy handbook, the principles of repairing a backflow.
Thank you.
I don't think, it is working. One final thing, Marty Johnson, EID again. Just want to clarify, I'm not advocating for an additional certification at all. Thank you.
Marianne Wakeman, ASSE International. I'm just wondering if we can go to what are the next steps now, and where are we going from here? Will we get a draft of the document that you're putting together? Will we have a chance to review that? Will there be another stakeholders meeting? I just kind of wondering where do we go from this point? I know we're going to submit comments, but comments that have been submitted in advance of this meeting, are those also being considered, or do they need to be resubmitted?
Well, the next step in our process is to release the policy handbook, but I think between now and then, there's an opportunity for us to kind of focus on some of these issues we've heard about today and some of the feedback we've gotten, and maybe get some of those more difficult issues out for folks to consider before we put those in the policy handbook. They're obviously not cast in concrete then, but it'd be better to have a little more discussion on some of these more difficult and new things and challenging things before then. So I'm thinking I don't know that we'll do another meeting like this, but it would be relatively easy for us to do a phone type of webinar. I don't know what the limits are, but we could certainly accommodate all the folks in this room and probably a couple hundred people. So I'm gonna have to give that some thought, but I do definitely see some value in us daylighting some options to some of the things discussed today as subtopics while we work towards kind of finalizing, getting the draft together of all the things that are relatively straightforward. So I haven't really answered your question, but I do think we need to have some sort of process with folks, stakeholders and so on some of these issues before we put the draft out there. Maybe some revision to some of the ideas.
One second, here you go. Here.
Oh, hold on.
I thought it had been announced earlier that there would be another stakeholder meeting in June. Was that?
Well, there'll
Did I
be
misunderstood?
well, what we'll definitely have is the 2 public hearings on the draft policy handbook, but
I see.
I feel like in some of the sections, there's a little bit of work and some thought we need to put into it, maybe run some of those things by, well, really stakeholders and perhaps by
but by
posting,
June, we'll.
maybe taking comment on some
Got it.
options somehow in advance of putting the handbook out there.
But by June, we'll have the draft and we'll be commenting.
That's
on
our
it.
goal, yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So,
Any other questions? Okay. Yep.
For those of us that are here today or on the webinar, will we be included in on any future notifications for additional workshops or drafts to be reviewed?
any additional outreach we do on this, we'll be posting on our website and sending a LIRIS list, so yes.
Yeah, we have a listserv on our website that you could sign up and they'll automatically send you any updates related to changes in regulations. So you could send an email or we could forward that and the link to where to register for those email lists.
Are the parties specifically writing the regulations or the handbook? I mean, are they required to have either some kind of cross connection control certification or experience as a program coordinator, or both, or any kind of what is the state's policy towards the experience or our certification requirements of the drafters?
Could you repeat that again? Is it required
He's
to
asking
have
if the people who are writing this handbook have backflow tester experience or program management experience, that kind of thing.
That's not a specific requirement, but to be honest, we're relying on the expertise we're absorbing from you folks. So we don't, I'm not a tester, I'm not a specialist, so we really need our involvement with the industry and what we hear from you folks and vetting things with you. So.
And there are some of us that have cross-connection control certifications, things like that, but not the big backflow testers.
John Graham, California Water Service. There's been a lot of discussion about the California Plumbing Code. I have a lot of respect for the Plumbing Code and appreciation. I just want to make sure that we're clear that when we're talking about these regulations, they apply to the water suppliers. And they're two separate universes, if you will, even though they are somewhat connected. When Title 17, Title 22 refers to the water distribution system, it's talking about the water mains out in the street. But the plumbing code, when it talks about the water distribution system, it's the pipes in the building. So while there's a lot of useful information in the plumbing code that we could leverage in developing these handbooks, because all the hard work and head scratching has been done by other subject matter experts, I don't know that it's appropriate to lock both of these together, because now we create a lot of confusion on what is a distribution system, where's the responsibility, how is it the water supplier is responsible for the distribution system? Oh, but it's that distribution system, not that distribution system. So I think we need to be careful in how we link the two.
So Title 17 currently states that the water suppliers shall have provision for cross connection within either the premises or at the meter, at the point of connection, or both. So I think given that flexibility to address cross connections either internally based on the Title 24 or point of connection based on Title 17, it should be up to the water purveyor and the type of program they wanna run. My last thought, I believe, Mark, you mentioned before that this is a living document that is going to be reviewed every 3 or 4 years, right?
Well, certainly a policy handbook we can update a lot more readily than going through regulations. So I think that was a big reason for choosing this pathway. So we can do updates.
All right, I think we'll go down to the last comment, and then we just have a couple minutes for Mark to wrap it up.
right, Dave Gann, City of Oceanside. I participate in a lot of code development process, and it's very important to have some technical people, to be part of this process to make sure that it's enforceable language. Obviously, you guys have a lot of work to do to try to come up with something that's going to work the first time. The way we do it in code development type process is, we put together technical advisory committees or subcommittees of some kind. Have you given any thought to putting together a technical advisory committee that would spend hours and hours and hours, drilling down on the details of this?
We've certainly done that in many different areas, and I think this could be an opportunity for some of that. I think it's a good thought.
And if you did,
on,
hopefully it would
specific
be
issues that are, or groups of issues that are.
So the way that I'd recommend doing that is making sure it's a very balanced committee, of course,
Okay,
so that
right.
everybody has, that has an interest in this, or from different perspectives, get to participate. Yeah, and I'll leave you my card if I can advise you how to, do that, or show you examples of how, the Building Standards Commission does it, how IATMO does it, how the ICC does it. I'd be happy to help with that.
I keep saying last comment, but this one's the last one.
Regarding the provision for protection at the meter or internally, I was involved with the system of some 3,500 connections, and we did use that provision, of course, with in concurrence with the district engineer. So it is possible and has been done.
Value all you guys' expertise, so please submit more comments to us. Anything else you think of or something you didn't get to say today? And then Mark.
I think what I would say is you probably have no idea how valuable this is to our process, what we hear today. We have a tremendous amount of expertise within our organization from interacting from our jobs. We don't have our hands on a day-to-day basis like a lot of you folks. So we need to hear about that. We hear about a lot of it in our day-to-day jobs. We absorb it. But the practical side of things, the implementation questions, the strategies, it's very helpful for us to hear about all that. And I encourage you to submit whatever other comments you have. We'll read all of them and pay attention to all of them. And thank you all for coming and on the webcast as well. So thank you. Thank you for all of your work. Oh, no, it's really good to have you. Good to hear. Glad you can make it down. Thanks. Actually,